Good morning, everyone. Good morning, sharks. Fins up. Welcome to this edition of the Distinguished Lecture Series. I am Preston Jones, Dean of the H. Wayne Huizinga School of Business and Entrepreneurship, and I'm so happy that you're here today. My remarks are going to be brief because we want to get right to the program. We have a very exciting program for you today, and a speaker in Paul Hill. You'll learn a little bit more about him later. But I'd like to recognize some special guests here today. First, our sponsors from Bank United. Please give them a round of applause. They sponsor this program. And I have with us Mary Harris. And Mary, would you like to come up and say a few words, please?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Good morning, everyone. I don't want to take any extra time up. I just want to say thank you all for being here. Bank United is so proud to support the community and especially businesses. We're a bank especially for businesses and entrepreneurs. So we're just really pleased to be a part of this, and I'm personally happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a few other guests I would like to recognize from the Board of Governors. Is Robert Miller here? Robert Miller? Robert's not here. Peggy Nordine from Star Mark. Peggy, didn't make it. Okay, she's not here yet. The Entrepreneurs Council members, we have Lee Feldman from Pops Corn. Is Lee here? Now, if you ever get a chance to eat some Pops Corn, it is absolutely amazing, and Lee is a great supporter of ours. Ed O'Donnell, who's on the council for Entrepreneurs Ed. Nathaniel Poole and guest. Is Nathaniel here? How about Wayne Stofsky? Wayne, how are you? Wayne runs John Galt Insurance. Welcome, Wayne. We also have, I'd like for you to give a round of applause for Ramon Rodriguez. He was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 2004. Ramon Rodriguez. Other guests includes a gentleman by the name of Kelly Hill. And Kelly is a brother of Paul Hill. He comes from us from the west side of the state. Kelly, welcome. We have in the back Dean Eric Ackerman. Dean Eric Ackerman. Now, Eric is here. Maybe get a chance to go down to the fourth floor to see what he has down there. You'll be very impressed. He's a kind of a fly guy as well. So, Eric, welcome. We also have Dean David Lotion from the Optometry School. Dean. Is Dean Elena Langen here from the law school? Is she here? She's over there probably in court or something like that. And I also like to thank my colleagues on faculty. They're here with their students, and we could not accomplish what we accomplish here every day at Huizinga School without them. So my colleagues and faculty, please stand. Please stand and be recognized. And for the reason why we're here today is for our students. And when I say sharks, I really mean that sharks. I was listening to the president a while ago, and he was talking about you guys. And he made a statement that I think that really is going to resonate today, because he says, and I agree with him, that NSU sharks are leaders. You're not led. NSU sharks are leaders, and you're not led. And today you're going to learn more about leadership. And this series of distinguished lectures is about leadership. It's about getting things done. It's about overcoming obstacles. And so with that in mind, I would like to introduce our speaker. You have his bio in front of you, but I'm just going to read a little bit about what he's accomplished. Today, Paul Hill is responsible for all aspects of mission operations and directorate support for manned space flight. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. Astronauts? No? Come on, you know you want to be an astronaut. Absolutely. And he wanted to fly jets. Now, Paul doesn't fly, but he served in the Air Force. and before coming to Mission Control. He's responsible for mission planning, flight techniques and procedures, flight control and crew training, simulators, and managing all flight operations, contracts supporting shuttle, space station, and the Constellation. He manages an annual budget of $650 million, 500 civil servants, and 3,000 contracted personnel. But I think that in itself is what he does as a leader. And I'd like to read to you a passage from Stephen Covey's book, The Third Alternative, which I think embodies what he is and who he is. True leaders define and achieve enduring success by developing character and competence and taking principled action. They don't wait for others to define it for them because they see themselves as uniquely gifted. They compete against no one but themselves. In economic terms, they are the only providers of what they provide, so they can auction their talents to the highest bidder. These leaders create their own future, and with time and circumstance, they might fall short of their goal, but they never actually fail. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Hill.
Dr. Jones, thanks for that great introduction, and thank you to all of you for having me here to talk with you. Before I talk, I'll warn you now, I'm going to go pretty far afield. I'm going to talk a little bit about some space stuff. I'm going to talk about business. I'm going to talk a little bit about managing people. And all of it is intended to wrap back and reinforce all of the same notions, which my guess is in not too many minutes will become pretty apparent to you. I mean, before I get into that, the one thing I'll tell you is I'm frequently asked by people that work for me, what is it that keeps me awake at night? And part of what I hope you'll get out of what I'm going to tell you this morning is whether I was in mission control, actually running mission control and flying the missions, which on many days I wish I was still doing, or in the management positions or executive positions that I've had since, my answer to that question, what keeps me awake at night, is always about the same. And it is, what have I missed? What is it I have done wrong in leading my people? And what is it that I have done that has misled my guys to not bring me the right answers and solve problems for me? And which part of that would I look back on and see that I did it? And if I had just asked the question differently, or if I had just told them something, made some decision differently, they would have had the opportunity to keep me from making some wrong decision and do the right thing for our mission or for our business. We'll see if over the next hour I reinforce that notion or if I lose you, because like I said, I'm going to kind of go far afield. But I promise you, all of it wraps back to that same message. So I'm going to talk about risk, ostensibly, and perspectives on risk and leadership from the perspective of mission control. And I'm going to give you several different perspectives for mission control, both in the room as well as managing it as a $650 million enterprise. In space flight, like say when you see what's on the video here that we're going to play in just a few minutes, the big obvious risks tend to have similar obvious right answers, similar right decisions. So rockets burning, some bad things may happen to the astronauts. Generally, we know what are the top bad things that are going to happen and what should we do to make sure those things don't happen. The tougher management job is finding those same right answers for the less obvious, the less apparent situations, not necessarily when you have the big rocket sitting on the pad or lots of fire squirting out of the back end of it. Risks that, if you leave them alone, they may grow into some big scary risk, even if you're aware of it. But by not paying attention and not managing it differently, they now pile up on you, and now something bad happens that, like I said a few minutes ago, you look back on and wish you had been aware, wish you had the cue and done something differently. What we have found is if you can be intentional in your risk trades, your risk management for those big obvious things, when the fire is shooting out of the rocket, and if you can understand why you make the decisions you make in those cases, it becomes much easier to be just as intentional in those less obvious cases. The little things that a year later you wish you had caught and done something different about. As a leader, as you push that intentional risk trading down, so you don't just hold that up at your level, especially in a large organization like mine, but instead you push that down and have your folks exercising that same type of risk trading, that same deliberate decision making. You get two things out of it. First, the organization, the people that work for you, become better at doing it, and they become better and better as they do it. In fact, they do it well enough that it becomes a culture that's sort of a self-fulfilling or self-fulfilling prophecy. They keep becoming better at it. They find all those less obvious problems and solve them and just bring you solutions without you as the leader having to engage or point them in the right direction. Which then, number two, also frees you up as the leader to focus on stewarding the culture and making strategic decisions for the direction of the corporation or the direction of your enterprise. Because the folks that are working for you are taking care of business of those little things that otherwise would be keeping you up at night. So going back to this video, not all risk is created equally. Some risks, like some of the ones I'll show you here, are things that can kill you right now if you don't manage it. Some of them will kill you later, today, maybe tomorrow. There's other risks that may take months or years to snowball up that finally has some significant impact on your business. Worse, some of those risks are insidious things. You're aware of them. So they didn't just get by and you didn't know about it, but you did know about it and you passed judgment on it because it just doesn't look like a big deal. We now can ignore this. And officially, as an organization, we're going to stop worrying about this thing because it really doesn't matter. As a leader of an organization, it's your job as the leader to be aware of all of those risks. The big obvious ones, which if you run your organization well, your people will always get right, and that paranoia to keep your mind open to those little less obvious things that might snowball on you. That's your responsibility as a leader, and more importantly, it's your responsibility to push that mindset down into your workforce and into your team so that they are proactively managing those risks and staying ahead of them. So let me play this video. I think everybody recognizes the Space Shuttle orbiter on the pad. Oh, I don't want any sound. It's good, just like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm all over. So, sitting on that pad, that's 4.5 million pounds of space shuttle hardware and explosive rocket propellant. As the engines are getting ready to ignite here, we're going to have about 1 million pounds of fire just coming out of those 3 engines on the back of the orbiter itself, where the orbiter is the part that looks like the airplane. Those 2 white solid rocket boosters on each side of the tank are each putting out about 3 million pounds each. So about 7 million pounds of fire is now shooting out of the back of that shuttle rocket stack, shooting that 4.5 million pounds of stuff up into the sky. That fire that you see coming out of the back, that 7-ish million pounds of thrust, when it ignites, is burning at about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit at pressures of about 6,000 pounds per square inch, which is equivalent to being about 2.5 miles down at the bottom of the ocean, just to give you an idea. In fact, there's enough propellant flowing just out of the main engines that if you picture a normal family-sized swimming pool in somebody's backyard, you can empty that much fluid out of that tank in about every 25 seconds while these engines are burning. Those engines burn for a little over 8 minutes. Again, just to give you an idea of the effort it takes to throw that orbiter into space. And already, the entire stack, everything, tank included, is going supersonic. 8.5 minutes later, those engines will all cut off, and that airplane, which weighs in at about 250,000 pounds, will be traveling 17,500 miles an hour and will be in space. It'll be in space with no air, so vacuum all around them. Temperature swings, orbit to orbit, will run from about negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. There's micrometeoroid and debris. You might have read about this in the paper. We've got all this space junk floating around out in orbit. Some of it is old rocket bodies. Some of it's old satellites that are falling apart and decaying. Some of it is just rocks, asteroids, pieces of asteroids, things like that, part of the universe that are whizzing by. And to make it even better, those things that are whizzing by are also whizzing by at speeds like 17,000, in some cases 30,000 miles per hour. And worse, sometimes they're going the opposite direction. It's a scary place to be. After we get these guys in space, we're not done. We go up there for some kind of mission, and for the last 15 years, most of the time that mission was to the International Space Station. So that 250,000 pound orbiter flies up to about a 1 million pound space station that's also traveling over 17,000 miles an hour, and flies up in front of it so that they can dock to it, connect up 3 little spindly latches, and then open up a hatch and put new astronauts on board, take the old astronauts off, and then use a couple of robot arms, one from the shuttle and one from the station, to pull 20,000 pounds, 30,000 pounds of equipment and cargo out of the payload bay and attach it to the International Space Station. And those robot arms, by the way, not capable of holding up their own weight here on the surface of the Earth. As if that's not bad enough, we then take a couple of our friends and we put them in spacesuits that are about this thick, several layers of different kinds of materials, and we put them outside in that same vacuum with all those temperature swings, all that micrometeoroid stuff floating around or whizzing by. And then we have them connect up fluid lines, power lines, data lines, put on antennas, and whatever that new thing is that we just brought up in the shuttle, they get it ready to actually operate, so it really is a new piece of the space station. And when all of that's over, you see that fire that's coming out of the back end of the shuttle. Think about all of that propellant, all the energy it took to make that shuttle go 17,500 miles an hour with that 7 million pounds of fire. All of that energy is still in the shuttle because it's still screaming down the range or screaming around the orbit 17,000 miles an hour. We have to take all that back out. How do we take that out? Most of us know. We drop the shuttle down into the atmosphere, and the drag from the air slows it down. And when it does, it creates a fireball. So rather than shooting all that fire out of the engines, we create this fireball around the outside of the shuttle, and that fireball and the drag that comes with it is what slows the shuttle down so that it can land at the Kennedy Space Center half a planet later. That fire that's flowing around the outside of the shuttle also happens to be about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Some parts of the outside of the shuttle itself heat up to temperatures on the order of about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum that the shuttle structure is made out of melts below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So my bottom line and all that, scary. Space is a scary place to be. It's a scary place to get to, and it's a scary place to come back from. That's real risk, and that's the risk that really dominates what my organization does. So let me switch gears from the video. This is my test as a manager to see if I can manage this by myself. It's good that one of my guys isn't here because he would already be doing it for me. All right, so that takes us to MOD, the Mission Operations Directorate. This is the organization that I've been an executive in for the last several years. This is the organization that owns mission control, so to speak, and a number of other things that I'll describe for you here in a few minutes. I'll talk some interchangeably about mission control and MOD. And I likely will not know when I'm switching back and forth. That's why I tell you. This is sort of one of our rah-rah pictures here, or a commercial, if you will. So let me talk a little bit about MOD and mission control, and then I'll switch and talk about some business things. So as Dr. Jones said, we're responsible for planning, training, and flying. Not just any flying, but manned space flight. And we've served in that role, as you can see by the timeline on the bottom of the page here, in every NASA manned program that's ever been flown, starting with Mercury in the early 60s, and then Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, Apollo-Soyuz, Shuttle, and the 30 years of the myriad of things that we did with the space shuttle, and the last 15 years of constructing and then operating the International Space Station. This endeavor isn't much safer today than it was in the early 60s when we first started doing it. It's not likely to be it's certainly not going to be safe. Not likely to be much safer than it is today for some time to come, just as the nature of the scary technology it takes to do the job. Overall, our mission is to fly our men and women into space, get the mission done, and get those people back down to the ground safely, and not necessarily in that order. Our primary mission, protect the crew at all costs. Nothing else matters. Protect the crew. If one of our people in MOD makes a mistake, it may cost us a $500 million mission that we can't afford to get back. It may cost us a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft that the nation can't afford us to replace, or worse, it may cost us the lives of friends of ours who are trusting us to be as good for them as we've always been for every other crew. To do that, to do the jobs that MOD is responsible for, to manage the risks like some of the things that we saw in that video, internal to MOD, we rely on a very specific type of leadership, and it's three specific things. Technical truth, integrity, and trust. My guess is in the next 30 minutes or so, you will become accustomed to hearing those words. You might, in fact, get tired of hearing me talk about technical truth, integrity, and trust. In our case, it's all about ensuring that our people will do the right thing every single time. In every situation, they will just get it done, where getting it done means protecting the crew, and if possible, get the mission done, especially when there's not any chance to get any help. So the rocket's burning. Some big emergency is happening in space. It's come as you are. The experts that are there have to understand what's happening. They have to make the decision right now. We have to know they will do the right thing every single time. And the right thing isn't just do the math right and don't make a mistake. It's approach the problem with the right value set, make sure that you're staying honest to what is most important to us. So I said in MOD, this is technical truth, integrity, and courage. I'll explain some of what that means. Technical truth is one that gets a lot of people's attention. Technical truth and the focus on technical truth in MOD, here in Mission Control, I say I would best describe this as everybody has heard the phrase, well, what's true for you is not true for me. Well, that's your truth, it's not my truth. In Mission Control, especially in the scary moments, like in the fires coming out of the back of the rocket, that doesn't have any place. There's only truth. There's only exactly what is happening in the universe right now. What is happening to these friends of ours? What is happening to the spacecraft? It doesn't matter what you want to happen, what you think should be happening, what you would prefer would be happening. We need you to be making decisions and evaluating the data on technical truth, not what your opinion is, what is actually going on. Focus on finding technical truth. Proving that your theory was right doesn't actually keep the astronauts alive. Being right keeps the astronauts alive. Integrity, then. We have a very special look at integrity that keeps us honest and keeps us focusing on technical truth. And it would be things like knowing the difference between what you know and what you think. As you become good at something, as you become experienced, even known in something, say one of our flight controllers or one of our flight directors, an astronaut who's now famous, it is easy to stop working as hard on the technical detail. It is easy to fall back and assume that now you know it all because you've always been successful. You've always gotten away with it. Clearly, you just know. What's worse, people that work for you will also share a similar confidence in you. If you're the big dog, if you're the person that has always been right, people around you will stop second-guessing you and stop checking your work. What do we expect our people to do? Be aware of that. Know when you are using your opinion. Know when you are shooting from the hip. Know the difference between what you know and what you think. And how do you do that? You have to know why you think something is true, right? Do I know this is true because I've seen this problem before, I've solved it before, so I don't even have to look at it this time? I'll just use the same answer that we've always come up with, in which case you're just guessing. And the guess might be okay, but know that that's what you're doing. Because somebody else that you're working for might in fact weigh in with a better answer. It might wake you up to the fact that maybe this isn't the same situation after all. You don't have that opportunity if you blur that distinction out and just buy into how great you apparently already are. Don't confuse defending your position or your organization with doing the right thing. So again, take the mission control case. We're not declaring a winner. In fact, my people become very, very good at arguing on their feet. We sometimes are referred to as the debating society, the mission control debating society. Because in mission control, it's like graduate level oral exams every single day. The data's flowing in real time. You're talking to your peers and you're talking to the scary flight director at the back of the room about what you're seeing, and you're making judgments on it right now and asking astronauts to take certain actions to save their lives right now, day in and day out. As you do that, you do become really, really effective at it. It's not about declaring a winner. When we show up in a conference room, though, and our people are debating, say, with another engineering organization who has a difference of opinion on how we ought to fly in some emergency case or how we ought to plan some next mission. The goal for MOD isn't to go in and crush the guys that disagree with us so that we win. The goal for us is, let's hear them out. Let's make sure that we really are right. And let's listen for which parts of their answer might actually be better than ours. In fact, which part of their answer is right and we have an error. And it was only because we listened to them that we caught our own error. Because if we're going to declare a winner, the winner has to be that we found technical truth. Because ultimately, you have 7 astronauts that are going to climb into the rocket, and they're expecting us to keep them alive. If my folks win the argument and are wrong, how proud am I in MOD that we were right and we won the argument and we just killed the next crew? It's not about defending your position. It's not about declaring a winner, except for finding technical truth. And that leads us to that last thing, courage. Courage in mission control I usually describe to our folks as being willing to take personal risk. It's not the same kind of personal risk that the astronauts that get into the rocket that now got hurtled down range. It's not the same kind of risk that those people take. But it's very equivalent and in some cases feels just as scary to our folks. So you show up in a conference room and around you in the conference room are the big dog managers from manned spaceflight. People who have earned their stripes, men and women who have scars, who have reputations of having made right calls over and over again to save the day, save the mission, protected the crew. Now those people all tend to agree with some decision that's being made. As a newer guy or a more junior guy, you're sitting there thinking, I think they're missing something. I don't think they're right about this. That can be an intimidating thing to do. To actually speak up and argue with the folks with the reputation, especially in front of your peers who now are going to see you blaspheming and arguing with the people that have already been there and done it. On the other hand, sometimes the emperor has no clothes. So what is our expectation for our folks? You've got to suck it up and make the call. In mission control, not being willing to evaluate the data and make the decision, you might as well not be there at all. In fact, it's worse because we think you're taking care of business and in fact you're scared to death and not able to do the job. So we're running at risk that we're going to miss something in your world. You need to get out of the way and put somebody there that can do it. In the same way, in a conference room, in a meeting, you hear the big dogs saying something that sounds like they're going down the wrong path, we expect our folks to speak up. It's a hard thing to do because sometimes you might be wrong and the big dog's are not going to be happy with it. Your peers, your boss may not be happy that you spoke up out of turn. What if you're the one person that in fact knows this time we missed something and the folks at the table that can make the decision and make a difference listen to you and have the opportunity to do the right thing. In mission control itself, we absolutely are unforgiving in our people not being willing to do this and not able to demonstrate it day in and day out. It's just as an important or an effective tool in our management ranks in MOD, not just in mission control. So let me describe this a little bit more about what that looks like in mission control. So day in the life of somebody that's plugged in and flying the spaceship. We'll go back and go through them again. Technical truth, integrity, and courage. So technical truth, what is it we use so that the mission control folks, the individuals sitting there, can go after technical truth? Well, first, we're measuring hundreds of thousands of things in the spacecraft and bringing that data down to the ground every hour. Pressures, voltages, velocities, temperatures, you name it. We're measuring. If you can measure it, we're measuring it, and we're bringing it down, and we're watching the spacecraft, making sure it's doing what it is supposed to be doing. We also expect our folks to know, based on where the spacecraft is in the sky right now and what it's doing, what should the environment be? How hot should it be? How cold should it be? How fast should we be moving? Should we be going higher? Should we be getting lower? If we go hands off, do we fully understand what is happening in the environment and what should be happening to the spacecraft, independent of what the data is telling us? Then what is the spacecraft capable of doing? And what is the crew capable of withstanding? How much can we put them through before we break them? Because sometimes we find ourselves in a position where what we designed the spacecraft to do isn't enough. If we can't make it go faster, if we can't make it go hotter, we're going to lose everything. We'll have to abandon the ship or we could lose the crew. We've got to push the envelope or we're not going to be able to keep these guys alive. And if we do it, are we going to kill the crew anyway just by making the spacecraft do this scary thing? Can they in fact go through this? And then what action do we need to take? For whatever we're faced with right now, what action best protects the crew? And once we're sure we've protected the crew, what next best action can we do that gets as much of the mission done as possible? All of that goes through those folks' minds in mission control all the time while they're sitting in there on console with the spacecraft. As for integrity, I said we're measuring all these things, we're bringing the data down. What do we also expect our folks to do? Be paranoid. In fact, don't trust your data. You should be asking the question all along, what could be happening right now that could mislead you, that the data could be wrong? Is there something in our satellite network where we bring the data in that could skew that data, that makes us think everything is nominal? In fact, we're looking at old data, and the spacecraft is now getting into trouble, and we aren't paying attention. And was there a cue that we could have seen that would allow us to notice that and fixed it and be right on top of things and protecting the astronauts? Or have we had a computer fail? And we have these all the time where certain computers, if they fail, they keep sending data down. The other computers start sending the old data down from the same computer. What indications do we have that that's happened? How do we know that the data's lying to us? What are those cues? Because what's it all about? Keep yourself honest. Make sure you're chasing technical truth, but remain paranoid that you have lost something and you're not paying attention. How can you find those things out? Does what we see in the data, does what the astronauts are telling us, does it fit with our expectation? So in this part of the flight, we know what was supposed to happen. We know what the spacecraft is supposed to be doing. We know whether or not it's supposed to be warming up or cooling down. We know what the astronauts should be doing. But we're seeing something different in the data. Does it make sense to us? Do we go off the plan, so the data that we're seeing that diverges from our expectation, does it make sense? Or does it make sense, and because it makes sense to us, we stop paying attention? Where's that paranoia? Where's that thing that we should be checking to make sure that the data is not lying to us, even if it's consistent? Always verify. If it's consistent, why is it consistent and should it be? If it varies from what we expected it to be, do we know why? Don't ever leave that question unanswered. Know why this is happening. Because if you don't know why, you likely don't know what's really happening, which means you're not actually managing the risk. Some bad thing is about to happen or could happen for something you're responsible for that you might have managed. And then the last thing, courage. Some of the hard decisions you have to make in mission control aren't just what next scary thing are we going to do with the spacecraft. It's how about I don't do anything? And is it safe if I just go hands off? Because what we're seeing in the data absolutely doesn't make sense. But based on what the crew is telling us, based on what we feel really confident we know, we think everything's safe right now. And if we start trying things now, we might make it worse. And it's bad enough as it is. Is it safe for us to just go hands off and try to collect more data? Maybe get more engineers to look at the little bit of data that we have so that we don't get in too big of a rush to send the crew off in a direction we really, really wish we hadn't done. And how long do we have to think like that? Right? Again, does this sound like paranoia? How long do we have to not do anything? Because in some cases, maybe we have 30 seconds, and within the next 30 seconds, this engine's going to blow up. We wish we had more data. We'd like to have another hour, in fact, to collect data, talk to some other engineers, and make a decision. We got 15 seconds, and after that, we've got to make the call. We have an astronaut on board who has to throw one switch, and we've got to tell them right now, now's the time. If we don't have an emergency like that, and we're not sure what to do, how about don't touch things and don't make things worse than they already are? And when we're preparing for some next mission, and while we're flying some mission, we ask questions like that over and over again. For normal operations, we plan the entire mission out, and as we plan it out, we're asking those questions all along the way. And then we go back through the mission plan and say, now at this point, what's the worst failure that could happen? And what is the right thing for us to do if that happens? Is it this computer, this turbo pump? And if that turbo pump fails, do we have to take action to protect the crew, or is the system good enough that we don't have to do anything? And then what are the most life-threatening emergencies that could happen? That if we don't already know what to do, we won't have a chance to intervene. We won't be able to help the crew. It got beyond our control. Know what the right answer is for those, and before we ever get into the flight, everybody's trained on that. Everybody knows this is the right thing to do, and we're not even going to have to talk about it. We're just going to do it by rote. And hopefully, there aren't too many things we have to do by rote, because again, if you're doing it by rote, you're not being as deliberate in the moment, and you run the risk of missing something and wishing that you hadn't. So when you look back down at this timeline at the bottom, that thought process has been the mission control process for this entire 50-year period, and it's served us well. It's served us well producing leaders in mission control itself. So that's folks that today are in mission control flying the International Space Station. And they will also be launching a new spacecraft on its first test flight at the end of this year, followed within the next 2 years after that with a couple of different new rockets and yet another test spacecraft. Also leaders who are actively stewarding some of this culture that you hear me talking about here and there, and leaders who are routinely poached from us to lead outside of MOD, inside NASA, and outside NASA to lead in the industry. Now, when I talk to groups, most folks are expecting me to talk about rocket science and technical stuff, and it makes the most sense to people when they talk to a mission control person that we're going to talk about gee whiz, things like that. What you're hearing from me has an admitted moral tone. Technical truth, integrity, courage, being paranoid to keep yourself honest. And the moral to that story is anybody can do the book learning. There's universities all around the world that are putting out top-notch engineers. Even relatively average engineers are awfully smart folks that can do a really good job for us in the engineering fields. It's math, science, engineering. You just got to put your head down and learn it. Anybody can do it. But to be trusted to execute mission control at any level, not just in the leadership position, we have to know that you will do it right every single time, every decision, especially in real time, especially in those moments where you just have to be right. And we know that you are always going to execute the right way with the right thought process, the right value set in front of you. That expectation for effective leadership is just as critical for us outside of MOD, as I said a few minutes ago. Not just in mission control, but in our management ranks. And for MOD and our leaders, folks that we promote up to put in charge, to actually run mission control, raise future generations of flight controllers, those are folks that demonstrate not just their ability in the rocket science, but their ability to understand these things and always be right in the value set and to raise their folks up to value those same ideas. So I'm going to switch to another picture. Recall that launch video that I put up there. That video was taken in January a number of years ago. Perfect looking launch, and it was followed by 2 perfect weeks of operations in space. Anybody notice anything odd about that launch at all? Let's see. Here we go. At 81.7 seconds into the launch, you see this little red arrow, this little cloud here appeared underneath the wing. That cloud was apparent for maybe 2 frames of video. Hard to see with the naked eye. It was apparent to us during the flight, in fact, that something had come off that external tank and hit that wing. It was looked at and it was judged to be something that probably gave us trouble during turnaround. So after this shuttle has landed, we probably have gooned up some tiles in the bottom part of this wing, which has happened before, by the way. And we'll just have to have some techs go in there, pry the old tiles off, fix the surface underneath, and bond on some new tiles. No harm, no foul. Good to go. We won't even talk about it anymore. 2 weeks later, February 1st, 2003, we in Mission Control and the rest of the world saw this. This is over Central Texas. That bright spot in the middle, that's the crew compartment. There's 7 friends of ours from STS-107, Space Shuttle Columbia, that are in the middle of that little bright spot. Those folks trusted us to bring them home. Recall when I was talking about different types of risks, I use the word insidious, that there's some things that you know about that you may pass judgment on and wish you had that decision or that judgment to make back. What was the insidious thing about this day? The insidious thing was that foam. That foam that was coming off the tank, we hadn't just known about that for a few flights. We'd known about that for a couple of decades. That stuff had been coming off for some time. Imagine the challenge of spraying insulation foam on a tank that's going to fly supersonic through the air and keep the foam on the tank and not have it shed. It's almost an impossible engineering task. It becomes more impossible when you've decided it's not really a risk to the orbiter, we don't really have to work it too seriously and we can ignore it. And in fact, in a case like this where we know it's happened and we know it hit the orbiter, which we didn't think was possible either, by the way, not because we analyzed it, but we've been pretty successful at it, and it's never gotten us before, so it's an okay thing to keep doing, and it was a safe situation on this flight, until it wasn't. Now what's worse, after the accident, both during the flight and after the accident, there were a few key executives from the shuttle program who were adamant that foam striking that wing, it's not possible for it to damage the front part of the wing. And that was pretty well accepted conventional wisdom throughout the shuttle program. That was not a mistake just of these key executives. But they were hard over that it wasn't a big deal. After the accident itself, hard over. It wasn't this problem. It may have done something else under that wing that we don't know about. We know it didn't damage the front of the wing. It's not possible to damage the front of the wing. The Accident Investigation Board, a non-NASA board, separate investigation that was looking at what was the root cause, what actually caused this accident, what had we missed, very quickly focused on that foam strike and very quickly focused on the front part of the wing. And as we got more data over the next couple of months of the investigation, the data started strongly supporting. One, we knew we had a breach in the wing. We knew we had that 6,000 degree gas flowing into the wing right onto the aluminum that melts at 1,000 degrees. We knew that. But it's absolutely not possible to hit the front of the wing. To damage the front of the wing with that foam. Because if you think about it, that foam, how many of you have seen the foam pool floats you can get? You know, those little thin jobbies, right? That foam is about the same density as that stuff. And this piece of foam is about the size of a brick, a little bit bigger than a brick. Pretty light stuff, only weighed about a pound. There's no way it could punch a hole in the front of the wing of a space shuttle orbiter. And that position was held really strongly until about 3 months later when the Accident Investigation Board conducted a test in San Antonio, where they took a section of a real shuttle wing and they shot a piece of foam about the same size, same speed, same impact conditions and everything that we thought from the video it may have struck the front of that wing of the shuttle. Oops. And that's what happened in that test. That hole, by the way, which is hard to tell just looking at the picture if you don't know, if you're not real familiar with the wing of the shuttle, that hole is about this big around. When that test was taken, I was in the room with one of those key executives that was so adamant that foam could not have caused damage to the front of the wing. Color goes out of his face, and you knew at that moment, just looking in his eyes, he understood the enormity of his mistake and what that meant. And worse, what that meant for our entire organization, that everywhere in this great agency, there wasn't one engineer that did the engineering 101 effort of calculating the energy transfer of a pound of anything. When a pound of anything strikes anything else, traveling over 700 miles an hour, and the damage that could do. And immediately after this, some of our best guys, the experts on this system, did that literally on the back of an envelope, and also went white and were shocked at, holy cow, how could we have missed this? Of course, in their defense, They also did not consider it possible for that foam to fly from that external tank and make it over to the orbiter because of various aerodynamic reasons, which we were wrong about, and we didn't have data to support why we all thought it. But we all absolutely believed it, even without the data, and it never really occurred to any of us that we didn't really have data to support why we felt so strongly about it until after this happened. Incidentally, so I mentioned this hole is probably about this big around. Our conventional wisdom up until the accident itself was in that part of the wing, we could tolerate a hole that was no bigger than a little bit bigger than the size of the width of your thumb. After the accident, after this, we did some more testing. We realized we really couldn't tolerate a hole that's probably a tenth of the size of that even. So this doesn't suggest, by the way, that we had this size hole in that wing. What it does mean, though, is we absolutely could have damaged the front part of that wing, and it wouldn't have taken much damage, and this is what would have happened on entry day. So, going back to leadership, this is where deliberate leadership values in your organization, top-down leadership values, can make you or break you. Because think again about what I said about the scary proposition, the personal risk you take in those conference rooms. Who is it that owns the morality when you're the leader? The folks that work for you. Who is it that makes it safe for them to question whether you're right? Who makes it survivable? Who makes it okay? Who even makes it the expected practice that the people that work for you are going to challenge you and keep being paranoid that maybe you've missed something, maybe you've made the wrong decision? Who reinforces in your organization when you're the boss some commitment to what I keep referring to as technical truth? And who by their management practices makes it an easier act of dissent? Who makes it less courage required to stand up and argue with the boss or the other big dogs? And that is the boss. The person at the head of the table is the one that sets that tone. And it's only with that the folks that work for you will spot those little things and are willing to tell the big dogs, hey, maybe we're missing something. So let's switch gears from this. But we're going to talk data. This is not rocket science data. This is not space data, right? And I show you this, again, to illustrate how is it we could miss some things in evaluating data. This, in fact, is from about an hour-long critical thinking exercise I conduct with our mission control folks from time to time. So I'm going to have a series of plots. And the point of this exercise is look at the plot and decide for yourself, do you see what looks like normal behavior in the data? And by the way, this is some measurement that is plotted against time. So something's high or something's low over time, and time's going from left to right. So do you see something that looks like normal behavior? And do you see something in the data that looks like, well, now it's changed. Now the normal behavior has become different. And based on what you see, how would you predict this data to behave going forward? Which is an exercise my folks do more times than they could count every single day. Right? Now, ordinarily, I do this interactively with the audience, but so that I don't run out of time, I'll cheat and I'll answer for you. So in this particular case, if you were to ask, what does normal behavior look like? You might look at the blue stuff on the left and say, well, normal behavior looks like it's low, whatever this is. Maybe it's cold, maybe it's a low voltage, low pressure, whatever it is, it's below the line. And then something changes, don't know what, and then it looks like it's kind of hovering or dithering around the line. And then going forward, it's now above the line. A reasonable conclusion from this could be, it's going to keep increasing from here, whatever this thing is. Could be. Just looking at the magnitude, or how big that bar is on the far right compared to the other ones, it could be, it's now going to do the same behavior at about that same level above the line that it had been before the line. Kind of hard to tell. This will be one of those days that, wow, I wish I had more data. But, like I said, it would not be unreasonable to look at this and say, well, it's going to keep increasing now. Something's happened and our system's going the other direction. Could be. Here's another plot. See if this plot doesn't change what you think. This plot is 10 times more data of the same measurement. Those two arrowheads that you see there on the bottom, here, that plot fits all within those two arrowheads. So you see that little shape? Duplicates that shape. All of this data out here, that now is what happened 10 times earlier than this, which is good. I was just saying, I wish I had more data. So now when I look at this, I think, now maybe it's not as reasonable to assume this is going to keep increasing as it moves off to the right. Maybe as I look at this now, maybe it's more sinusoidal. Maybe it's now just going to fluctuate around the line. And by the way, the line that's on this plot is in the same place as the line that's on the plot above it. Now it's not necessarily so conclusive. Hard to tell. Fortunately, I have more data. This is 10 times more data. And everything in the green plot now fits between the arrowheads on that blue plot. But we have all of that data that goes out before. Well, now I'm even less convinced that our early conclusion that maybe it's reasonable that we're going to keep increasing whatever this measurement is. Maybe that's not so reasonable after all. Maybe, in fact, we should expect it to just dither around the line. Although this thing off to the left is also puzzling. Sure wish I knew what happened before that. But just based on the preponderance of the data, I would have some good confidence that this measurement's going to stay right around the dotted line. Last data set. This is 100 times more data than the blue. Probably not going to be able to get more data than this. And by the way, I can tell you now, to relieve you, we're not going to have more data than this. When I look at this, I would say it is reasonable to conclude now that most of your previous data sets were misleading. You didn't have enough data to fully understand the physical phenomena. This measurement, it is no longer reasonable, looking at this data, to assume it's going to keep increasing as time goes, as we go off to the right of the plot. In fact, it sure looks like the preponderance of the data is always below the line. But it sure dithers between some measurements. I don't know why, but boy, it sure looks repeatable. And it's 100 times the data set. You put all those things together, I don't know what the physical thing is. I can't explain why it's doing it, but I have awfully good confidence it's going to keep behaving like this. Anybody disagree? You may. Here's another measurement. Different type of data. This red line is the actual measurement. This is also something that we frequently are faced with in mission control. The dotted lines, those are somebody's predictions. So somebody who's an expert has decided, I know what this physical phenomenon is, and this is what's going to happen. So maybe this is a pressure in one of our tanks on the space station, and the pressure goes up and down, and we can't understand it. Somebody has decided they understand it, and they can model it. And they know, by the way, this measurement's going to keep going up. And that first dotted line that model was written before this data was recorded. So this is what we expect to happen. As they got more data, it did not increase and follow the line, so they updated the model, which is not unusual in engineering, right? Updated the model, brought that slope down, and boy, that really matched it. But then we saw the data spike back up. They updated the model again to make it steeper. Because the guys that were writing these models absolutely knew they understood the physical phenomena. And this physical phenomena is going to keep going up. We know it. Everybody knows it. As they got more data, it kind of went in the same trend, still not supporting their first hypothesis, but as it tended to show it's probably going to keep going up, they did everything they could to increase that slope of that prediction to show it going up. Because the scientists that were doing this absolutely know this thing is going to keep going up. So here's those first 4 plots. No annotations. Here it is with all the annotations, which I'm sure are very difficult for you to read. This is average global temperature. First plot is for the last 100 years. The next plot is for the last 1,000, then the last 10,000. The bottom plot is for the last 1 million years. The note at the bottom, and by the way, my job is not to debunk or change people's thinking about global warming. I leave you to reach your own conclusions. The note at the bottom was my message to the mission control folks that work for me. MOD's job is ruled by data. Be sure you understand its full context, not just the limited view that supports your going-in position. Foam's not dangerous. This measurement's going to keep going up. Maybe. Wish I had more data. I do have more data, as it turns out. And more data tells me I ought to expect this line to stay below the line for most of the time. And whatever's causing this, I can't fully explain it, but it looks like it's virtually unavoidable that it will almost always be below that line, independent of, when we just look at a 100-year snapshot, what's happening right now. By the way, when it's not above the line, does anybody know what the Earth looks like when this measurement's not above the line? The Thames River in England freezes solid. We have glaciers in the United States that go well down into Dixie. It is a world that none of us have seen for about 1,000 years or more, or anything close to it. And you can see that when you look at the last 1,000 years worth of data. Thank goodness for Florida, that right now is a somewhat warm time. This measurement, I cheated, also global temperature. A little bit different scale on the left, but it is the same idea. This plot matches exactly with those other measurements that show average global temperature. This is from 1989 to 2012. What's interesting about this is the models. That one that says IPCC 1990 on the far left, that was the model, and it was contributed to, by the way, by some NASA scientists at the Goddard Space Flight Center. who I won't name, that way I won't get sued. Those scientists and the folks that submitted this data to the UN in a report that started the world's attention on global warming as the phenomena that we all know must be really happening, when those folks let that model out in the public, those scientists had access to all of that data, that million years worth of data, even though many of them strongly support this. And as more data came in, they did everything they could to anchor new updates to that model to support their conclusion that surely this must be going up, and it surely must be us that's causing it, because we need to do something different. By the way, we may need to do something different. I'm now just talking about what is the data telling us. This plot, now I didn't show you a version of this, but I will say this just to get off the page on this temperature thing, and then we'll move on. And you guys can yell at me later about what you think about global warming if you like. You see this little green band that goes up to the right? That green band takes that IPCC, the UN sanctioned model, the latest update of the UN sanctioned model, and forecast up and to the right what the expectation is going to happen with global temperature from the year 2000 to the year 2020. That red line, some mathematician that didn't know any better, who also didn't know that this is going to keep going up no matter what, he modeled the data as an equation, ignoring the physical phenomena and trying to model the atmosphere or the environment. He just said, based on the behavior of this mathematically, what would be reasonable for us to expect the behavior of this going forward? This blue band that you see, kind of sinusoidally going forward, it has a black line and a yellow line, sort of its upper and lower boundaries. That blue band and those black and yellow bands are different versions of the mathematical expectation of that measurement going forward, just based on the last 1,000 years worth of data, based on just mathematics and not injecting into it what we really know is happening. Again, in mission control, our job is chasing technical truth, not defending the position, not making sure that we're right. Technical truth. So, how is that relevant to you guys? How is all of this space stuff relevant to you guys? So, when you think back on whether it's the average temperature stuff, you think about this, the most sophisticated analytics in the world, even the data right in front of knowledgeable people, experts on the data that they're looking at, will not protect you from your own biases, your own preconceived notions, your own heartfelt opinions of what really must be happening. If you're willing, or if the people that work for you are willing to ignore that data in front of you and evaluate it just on its merit, even the most sophisticated analysis will not protect you from those biases. And just like it didn't with us, with the greatest minds in manned spaceflight, it did not protect us from some things that are obvious even at the engineering 101 level outside of the agency. So the question for you as a leader then is, where are you ignoring the data that's right in front of you? Where are you ignoring the warning signs from your market or from your supply chain? And then worse, as you lead a larger organization, what about your direct reports? In my organization, there are three levels of management between me and the folks that actually do the work. The real guys that plug in a mission control or plan the missions, train the astronauts, do the job. 3 levels of management. By the time those biases are added up, if those things get added in at every single one of those levels, and we're not very deliberate to keep that from happening, how would I have any chance of finding technical truth? If by the time it gets watered down and I see the executive summary alone, how do I know? If I only see 100 years worth of the data every time and I don't see a million, how do I know if my folks aren't able to bring that to me? What's your best hope as a leader? Deliberate leadership values, and not just yours as the boss. You have to push that down into your organization as your organization grows at all levels. And in MOD, that's technical truth, integrity, and courage. And more importantly, it's not just in the control room, it's at all levels of management. All right, so let's get off that. This is mission control. This is the space station control room on a normal day in mission control. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about MOD as a business. So this will be about the last time I kind of go off the range, so to speak, or go far afield. So if I talk about MOD as a business, we peaked at about a $650 million enterprise, as Dr. Jones said, just before the end of the space shuttle program, with just over 3,000 people in the organization. It had been stable at about that size for about a decade. Like any big organization, especially with a budget like that, I must have a lot of stuff. And when you think about all the mission planning, all the training, all the flight control, we're more than just a handful of smart guys sitting in mission control. But we have facilities like this where we have all of the simulators, which are really expensive computing facilities. So on the left, you see a picture of inside the space station simulator where we train our astronauts. And below that, a training control room where we're training flight controllers with that same simulator. On the right side, kind of faded out there, are the old space shuttle simulators. Before the shuttle simulators were there, we had Skylab simulators, we had Apollo simulators. We've cleared the floor of all of the old stuff, and what you see in the bottom right corner of that picture is the prototypes of the new simulators that we have coming for the rocket and the spacecraft will test fly at the end of this year, and some other ones will be test flying over the next couple of years. This is another facility that we have these full fidelity mock-ups of all of our spacecraft. In the lower left, that's the actual space station laid out on the floor of our high bay, exactly the way it's built in space, all of the right size, where we train astronauts to actually live inside and do emergency procedures like fire, escape, things like that. And on the right, you see what's left of, in the middle of the page, or the middle of that picture in the high bay, the last part of the shuttle mock-ups that we have still. All the rest of them we've already cleared out of there, and you can see we're already putting early prototypes of some of the new spacecraft we're working on for new missions. Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, this is where we develop spacewalking techniques, train astronauts to go outside. We have full-scale mock-ups of all of our spacecraft at the bottom of the pool. These pictures you see at the bottom are various other various other enterprises we've brought in. As we finish building Space Station, we don't need all of the same capability. We have more than we need. So we're off peddling excess capacity and bringing customers in to offset our costs. Not necessarily a governmental way of thinking. But I'll give you a couple more ideas of non-governmental thinking in a minute. And this is the Mission Control Center. This is what most people, even inside NASA, know us for. This middle part of the building you see here, this is the historic wing. This is where we flew everything up through Apollo from. This new wing on the left, I say new, it was built in 1990. Gives you an idea, especially when I talk to my guys, gives you an idea of the generation, I guess, that I've now become the old guy that considers that the new wing. But the new wing is where we have flown Space Shuttle from and Space Station from. Ironically, this picture that you see in the middle on the right, that's the Space Station control room, which now is in one of the original Apollo control rooms. On the left was the Space Shuttle control room. And at the bottom is one of our prototype rooms where we'll start flying our new spacecraft from here before long. So, now let me talk business. This is a plot of the MOD workforce. This is number of people in the Mission Operations Directorate doing everything, not just mission control, but all of that mission planning, training, flying, and maintaining all of that stuff, all those buildings, all those mock-ups, all the simulators. We peaked at just under 5,500 people back in the early 90s. And back in the early 90s, all we were doing was flying the space shuttle, peaking at, again, about 5,500 people. Fast forward 10 years later, and we were flying shuttle, and it just started flying Space Station, and we'd come down about 30% in the size of our workforce. Over the next 10 years after that, as the Space Station became significantly more complex, we continued to bring down the size of the workforce. So at the end of that next 10 years, we were at about half the size we were 20 years earlier, only flying shuttle. Except now, we were flying shuttle at a higher flight rate, and we were operating the Space Station, and we were continuing to plan the remaining assembly job for the International Space Station. That next little wedge between 2007 and 2011, you see here, this is where we started developing the operations, the simulators, etc., for what was called the Constellation Program. The program was going to take us back to the moon and take us to Mars. And even as we committed to that, you can see the size of our workforce was coming down, intentionally. And then you can see where we are today in 2014, significantly smaller than we were here in 1990, 1993. And by next year, we're going to be down here at about 1,300 people. And at 1,300 people, we're capable of flying Space Station, two different spacecraft on several different rockets, and significantly more work than we had been doing in 1990, with a fraction of the people that we used back in the 1990 timeframe. Now, all of these bullets I wouldn't expect you to read. All they are is a reminder that during this 30-year time frame, 20-year time frame, shuttle flights themselves became about twice as complicated as they were in 1990. Well, twice as complicated means twice as long, twice as many EVAs, more people, half as many people in mission control flying the spacecraft. And on Space Station, Space station itself, in every measure, became 10 times more complicated in that 10-year period than it was when we first flew it in 1998, and yet still we brought the size of the workforce way down. If we look quickly at how this looks in dollars, in 1990, we were at about $400 million just to our contractors. Today, that would put us at almost $1 billion worth of buying power. This red line shows you what our actuals have been. Now, when I show folks this, it's normal for me to get the question, well, why does any of this stuff matter? And by the way, for us to make these changes, we had to have significant engagement starting in about 2006, where we talked change leadership. What is it about how we are running our organization, our value set? Have we fallen behind it? We started that in 2006. I hammer on that message, and people generally wonder, well, why is the only thing that matters from this not just the $100 million markdown? Because in 2010, January 2010, this is what was on MOD's plate. We were flying shuttle, flying space station, we were building the operations for these rockets on the lower left, we were going back to the moon, and we were going to keep flying space station. In February of 2010, all of those things were canceled except for ISS. And those things were all canceled because the Congress and the White House ran out of patience for a NASA that still had all of these programs way over cost and with no hope of bringing them down within budget. They lost confidence that we could do anything but be a NASA bureaucracy. And worse, MOD, the Mission Control Organization, was cast in the same light. We were considered relics of the 60s, a bunch of old white guys with short hair, white shirts and ties, and pocket protectors. No pocket protector. And we were generally referred to as the marching army. We weren't exclusively targeted, but we were broad brush with the rest of the NASA. The rest of the agency is not capable of doing these things. So that takes us back to change management. So I showed you the workforce plot, showed you how much we came down. Our budget had stayed flat for over 20 years, which significantly reduced our buying power while we did more and did harder work with less money. What's important about this is in 2006, when we started this change in leadership, that made this cost reduction possible, made this shrink in the size of our workforce possible, while still doing the same level of technical work. We started that change effort here in the 2006 timeframe. In 2006, boy, that was the heyday. We had lots of money. We had every reason to expect we were going to keep getting increases for inflation. We were going to the moon. Life was good for us. But we got the right leader at the time that recognized that we hadn't been talking about the right things in the management ranks, only in the mission control ranks, and we went to work fixing that. By 2009, 2010, those behaviors, moving that paranoia about technical truth, integrity, and courage out of the control room and into our management ranks had taken hold and had become a habit for our entire senior leadership team. By the 2009 timeframe, when the chaos hit in 2010, we did not spend a lot of time in MOD wondering what in the hell we were going to do. We did have our moment of concern because half of our budget, half of our revenue just disappeared. But more importantly, without that work, some of this leadership culture, this technical truth, integrity, and courage, some specific technical expertise dries up and we can't keep it alive because it's the nature of that work that allows us to keep those cultural things alive. So we became desperate to circle around what do we have to do to keep those things alive, what work do we have to capture in order to keep those things alive. Not let's go get any work, because any work isn't what we needed. We needed work that allowed us to keep those things alive so that we could still be the national asset. That when the country came back and said, now we're ready to go to Mars, now we're ready to go to the moon, or wherever else you're going to go, our guys still know how to do it. What did that do for us? Instead of this being our condition today in 2013, today MOD is responsible for planning and flying the spacecraft you see on the left, and we'll have the first test flight at the end of this year. That test flight was intended to not be participated in by any NASA organization. The intent was to buy that off of Lockheed Martin, who built the spacecraft. MOD, we fought our way in back through the back door and re-won the business back on the NASA side based on the merits. I'd like to say based on the technical merits. Not the case. Our entire community never lost faith in us technically. They just didn't know how much we had done since 1990 on the business side. And speaking of business, on the right, that's a commercial spacecraft that Boeing is building in competition for a contract that the agency started back in the 2010 timeframe to replace all of the NASA organizations and just buy the service from somebody else. What did MOD do? We went under the radar, and we went out and competed, and we won their business as well, on the merits, on both technical and on the cost side. We would not have had the opportunity to compete for any of that work and to capture it, which we had to capture in order to keep the culture alive inside my organization. If we hadn't captured it, we go away. We would not have been given the chance to do it had we not already been successful in the change leadership work that we had done in 2006 to 2009, when we didn't have to do it. And more importantly, if we hadn't started that before 2010, we'd have failed, and I'm confident we'd be out of business today, and likely would be in the position of hurting astronauts today, because folks would not be doing the job the way we do it. Now, this picture right here, this is from a sort of a sales brochure from Mission Control. I had my folks put this together in 2010. On another page, there's lots of data, lots of specifics about MOD, technical stuff and business stuff. This is a good reminder for me, because when we put this out, most people misinterpreted its purpose. Most people thought this was for me to go out to industry and make sales calls to get those guys to hire my people to fly their spaceships. In fact, this was for my senior management at NASA headquarters and some of the political types that affect policy that would allow me the room to go out and compete for that work. This was part of my opening calling card to get in the door and explain to them, we're not the MOD in 1990, at least not on the business side. Technically, my guys are geniuses. They are gods of manned spaceflight. On the business side, this ain't your daddy's MOD anymore. We've come a long way from a business perspective. Just give us a chance to compete on our own. And they did. Had we not done those things, my own NASA management would not have allowed us to compete for it. Now we're the only NASA organization that's actually not only just competed for, but has actually won any type of business like this. So, while our corporate strategy is really strong, we never lose sight that our primary mission isn't the business stuff. It's protecting the astronauts, keeping them alive, getting them back to the ground, and getting the mission conducted. So let me wrap up. I go back to what I started with. The critical, most obvious risks that you're ever going to manage, the right answer is always obvious to you. In MOD, we have to know that our people are going to handle those risks right every single time, especially when we haven't pre-planned it. Our anchor is a deliberately stewarded leadership culture. We've successfully leveraged those leadership values both in mission control, on the business side, in the politics, you name it. We anchor all of our decision making in those same values, those same ideas. In our business and in yours, those big scary risks that can kill everybody, destroy your business, are the obvious ones, like I said. The worrisome ones are those ones that you don't see coming, either because they seem benign or you let them cloud your understanding of technical truth. Understand how you make your decisions in the big scary ones, and make your decisions in everything with those same values in front of you. And then think about that data. Intuition, emotion, politics, all of those things cloud your understanding of technical truth. They cloud your people's understanding of technical truth. They absolutely require or increase the amount of courage it takes for the people that work for you to stand up and get your attention that the emperor has no clothes and you have to listen to them. So when I talk about space risks or talk about something like global warming, especially something like that, my guess is for many of you, emotions run high and you have your own biases. Imagine how much stronger your biases will be in some area that you're the expert, some area that you have proven yourself in the industry or in the business and everybody knows you're the person that's the big dog. Imagine how much stronger your emotions and biases will be on those. And it's your demonstrated leadership values that set the tone for your people's willingness to get your attention and change those things. So for yourself as a leader, you have to ask yourself, what's your compelling moral imperative that drives you and aligns the leaders that work for you? What are your technical truths? Where are you at risk of letting your biases and desires obscure technical truth? And how about the folks that work for you? And then beyond risk management, how will you keep those awarenesses in front of you, not just to manage the risks, but then to find opportunities to do things that you were not supposed to be able to do? And with that, I thank you for the time. I think I went long, didn't I? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for the commander? Yes.
Excuse me. You talked a little bit about marketing. I want you to get into it a little bit further in terms terms of NASA as it looks at its overall mission. For example, you have everything from, you have a lot of competition now. Way back when it was NASA and then the Soviets. Over the years, many more countries have gotten into it at different levels. Now you have everything from SpaceX to Richard Branson's Virgin, $250,000, you can take a ride into the atmosphere, into the farther atmosphere. Does NASA look at different levels of competition, or does it have a targeted thing? This is where we are, this is what we do, these other people do those sorts of things.
No, we don't. We don't do, see, I gotta be careful not to say, NASA does not do as effective job at that as they should. The obvious thing to ask would be, which things did we do 40 years ago? Which things did we do 20 years ago? Because nobody else was doing them. So, like, if we're going to go to the moon, for example, if we're going to build a space station, we have to bring that work in-house, and NASA has to do it for ourselves. We can't just buy it off of industry. To a certain extent, in the last 20 years, we've been answering those same questions. Well, we haven't been answering those questions at all. We've been assuming these same answers from 20 years ago and 40 years ago. We're still trying to do much of the same things that we did 40 years ago. Rather than, well, let's recognize we don't have to develop our own avionics, our own computers anymore. The avionics industry, the IT industry, has gone so fast around us without us having to invest. Let's just cherry pick off it. In fact, how was I so successful in reducing our costs? One of the things I didn't mention is we cut our fixed cost in half in a 2.5-year program. How did I do it? We didn't invent our own computers. We took Dell and HP PCs and stuck them under the hood in mission control. It cost me 1/10 of what it would have cost me to go out and design my own government-owned computer. We still have a tendency in NASA to not do that, and instead just fall back and say, well, where do we want to be? If we want to be at the frontier, so for us the frontier would be outside of Earth orbit, then everything between launch and getting to there, we ought to give up to industry, if industry is capable of doing it. Now, the question is, are they capable of doing it, and are they capable of doing it as safely as we can do it, and not take too many risks with our astronauts' lives? But at some point, we want to give up launching and landing. We want that to become ubiquitous, like airline travel. And while we focus on doing things outside of the orbit that industry still can't make a profit doing, that if we don't do it, nobody else will do it, and push out that human presence. And we still, the agency still does not do a thorough enough recurring strategic job on that. And much of that's because, as leaders, you finally take over some piece of the portfolio, and you spent your entire career waiting for your chance to be in charge. Now that you're in charge, you want to do it right. And you want to do the thing right that you always watched happening while you were coming up. You don't want to go do some new thing, and you sure as hell don't want to give it up and give it to somebody else. So we're still challenged with that. This would be good not to post on a NASA website.
Any questions? Any more questions?
I have one. Good day, sir. I'm a finance professor, and a four-letter word that you talked about is a key word in our course, RISK. And the question is, you deal with risk so much at all levels. How do you keep your people from going nuts with stress?
So this may sound a little bit like a cop-out, but some of it is we do a pretty effective job identifying which folks tend to be almost stress junkies. Right, so I'm not looking for a bunch of base jumpers to be a mission control necessarily, but there are a lot of really smart engineers that have a lot of trouble doing it on the fly. So, imagine if your hardest homework you always have to do in front of the class every single time. And that's a lot of what mission control life is like. We have some really smart engineers, in fact, a lot of engineers that are way smarter than we are at mission control that cannot do it on the fly while the clock is ticking like that. We have to find the folks that both are good technically and are capable of doing it on the fly, and they have the confidence that they know how to do it and they can stick with their position. Right? But again, it's not just defending a position. It's they can stick with it because they have this data, they've done this analysis, and they know that they know this to be technical truth. So that's the real key, is finding those folks that have all of that. And if you do that, most of my people, if say we had some big failure, the one everybody knows about most recently was last summer, flooded a suit, water into the helmet of an astronaut who was on a spacewalk, came close to drowning. Very true. Most of my experts on spacesuits that weren't there were mad at themselves and felt like they let down their peers because they weren't the ones that were on console to respond to that. As stressful as that would be, because if you made the wrong decision, we could have killed that guy. But what most of my folks want to be, they want to be the person that's there. Not to get the glory, but so that they can help, because their job is to protect the crew.
Next question is, since you're always looking at risk and you're always looking at downside, attorneys in the business world are always looking at risk. And if you listen to them, you would never actually take on a business endeavor. So how do you get your people to stop the analysis paralysis?
In the mission control one, and NASA has that problem like any other really large organization. The MOD is kind of a little bit of an island where we tend to be somewhat cowboys. And if anybody else from NASA was here, they would ask me why I use the word somewhat. But we focus real hard to not just have the risk discussion. Because, yeah, you can stay really safe and never launch the rocket and never go anywhere. So what we have to say is, right, if we're going to conduct this mission, or we're going to go do this dangerous operation, now, what are the risks associated with that, and how do we manage those risks? How do we stay aware of them? It's not about, well, we're going to eliminate all of them. How do we rally around and control them and manage them and keep them from doing some bad thing and make sure the operation goes the way we want? Because we know we're going to operate. We know we're going to fly. Or in some cases, we've already lit the rocket. So the astronauts are going. Now we just have a decision to make. Do we want to risk killing them this way, or do we want to risk killing them this way? And that does have a nice kind of normalizing effect on the decision making. Is, look, this isn't going to be safe, fellas, so everybody get over that. Now, how do we manage all those relative risks? What's the safest way we can go and still get this done? Or there are some cases where we look at it, you know what? This just is not safe. We can't do it. If we haven't lit the rocket, let's not light the rocket, because we don't know how to manage this. Sometimes it happens.
A lot of what's done here at NSU is preparing the students for the future. What's the next opportunity after graduation? I have a 13-year-old son, and for several years, his interest has been aeronautical engineering. How he came up with that, I don't know at 8 or 9 years old. But 10 years from now, 12 years from now, when he's finished with his schooling, what are the opportunities going to be, considering what's going on with NASA and the airline industry as a whole?
It's hard to tell. Actually, it's not possible to tell looking forward, even just 5 years from now, what is NASA going to be doing in manned spaceflight. Right now, what's on our plate is space station. The life of space station was just extended out. When I say the life, as permitted by Congress and the White House, we have been now allowed to move that out from 2020 to 2024. We're pushing to move it out even to 2028. So we're going to be flying space station for a little while still. Any next thing, whether it's going back to the moon or to an asteroid or to Mars or any of that stuff, none of that stuff has been committed to. When the Moon and Mars program was canceled, all formal plans, or formal plan means an actual program with budget against it, all of that was zeroed out. There is no next program funded. So actually, we have been pushing internally. We need to get on with this. We need to establish what's that next hill that we're going to tackle. There's not agreement with that, though, in the White House and with the Congress. There are a lot of folks that think we don't need to pick any more hills. We don't need NASA to go to any next new place. And we're not legally allowed to affect the policy. Only say, if you want us to go take that hill, here's how we're going to do it. So hard to say. On the other hand, industry, the marketplace, has this great tendency to do stuff or to come up with things that we didn't necessarily plan out in the 5-year plan. And so whether it's in aerospace or anything else, I think airlines are still going to be looking to modernize. They're still going to be looking to reduce fuel costs. They're still going to be looking to improve the passenger experience so people will fly on your airline instead of somebody else's airline. There'll still be opportunity to improve airplanes and do other things in aerospace. And 5 years from now, well, you may quote me saying, I remember that guy saying that there's no idea what we're going to do. 5 years from now, it may be written in stone, by gosh, we are going back to the moon, or we are going to go to a Mars moon. By the way, you didn't ask, but if anybody wants to know what my opinion is, which will get me fired, we ought to be going to a Mars moon. We know how to do that right now. We have all the technology we need. We have to improve our life support, robustness, and reliability a little bit, but we could send an astronaut crew to a moon around Mars right now. What do we not know how to do? We don't know how to put people on the surface of Mars and keep them alive while doing it. And we don't know how to get them off of Mars and get them back to the Earth. That's a huge technological challenge. That is equivalent to the difference between swimming across the English Channel and swimming across the Atlantic Ocean. Going to the moon is swimming across the English Channel. Going to Mars is almost swimming across the Atlantic Ocean. And there's some technical things that it looks like it's just a little bit further, so how much harder can it be? Extraordinarily hard. And actually getting there, piece of cake. Dropping that size spacecraft onto Mars, that's hard. And getting it back off, we don't know how to do that. Don't know how to do it. Without having 100,000 hours worth of tech labor, like at Kennedy Space Center, pass the rocket up, fuel the rocket, and get it all together. And none of that exists at Mars yet. So you didn't ask me that, that's a freebie.
All right, we have time for one more question. Hi, you made a great case of showing us how that little piece of foam just brought down, and caused a huge tragedy. Subsequent to that, have you guys found a way to have that not happen again? That same piece of foam falling off the way it did?
We absolutely manage that problem. In fact, that's another one of those engineering things. You have to be really careful to keep fighting the last battle or fixing the last accident. But we absolutely fixed that one. And then the challenge we had to have inside our community was, now, don't just assume, well, now we fixed that. There's nothing else that we're not aware of. Oh, no. This needs to scare the hell out of us. We've been flying for 25 years when that happened. How could that have happened? So if that could happen after 25 years, just like the spacesuit, we've been using that spacesuit design for over 30 years when the helmet flooded. When it flooded, none of us were aware that it was possible for the water to flood through that part of the suit like it did. We did not think it was possible. And I'll tell you, I'm one of the ones that is an expert in the suit, completely flabbergasted. And then when we looked at it, we all wondered, how the heck did we not see that one coming? Oh my gosh, after 30 years. So you fix that problem, but boy, it has to always remind you, now be hungry and look for more, because there is something else out there. And if there's not something that's already there, when the suit's 10 years older, there's going to be some new thing, because as things get old, we find new ways of breaking.
One more round of applause, please. Technical skills, integrity, and courage. Words to live by, words to lead by. Paul, thank you for being with us. You honor us by being here. And on behalf of H. Manhattan School of Business and Entrepreneurship, Nova Southeast University, Fins Up Sharks, we thank you again. We'd like Mayor Harris to come up and make the presentation for the plaque. But we really thank you for this.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
So we have some more lectures in our series. Let's see what we have here. I have to do a little bit of a commercial. On Tuesday, February 4th, Napoleon Branford, co-founder and chairman of Siebert, Branford and Schenck, an outstanding presentation. And also following that, on the 13th, Thomas Gukin. He is with the author and speaker of Business Thought Leader. He's going to speak to you about rock and roll leadership. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you the next time.